Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited about because frankly, I'm just going to be chatting through some of my all-time favorite books. That's right, I have been reading and reviewing books on this channel for a long time, and I honestly love to just sometimes pick 7 of my all-time favorite books and chat about them and feature them in a video, and that is what we're going to be doing today. The first book I have to talk about is one that I have simply not talked about enough recently because it is for sure still one of my all-time favorite fantasy series, and that is the Baron the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. Catherine Arden recently came out with a new book, and I feel like her writing is getting a little bit of buzz once again, which is very well deserved. So I'm deciding to take this opportunity to turn eyeballs to the Baron the Nightingale series if you have not read it already. This trilogy is a journey, it is a feat, and it is also one of the most beautiful things I have ever read. In this story, we're introduced to our main character Vasya, and in book 1, she is a young child. Over the course of the entire series, it's very much a coming-of-age story. We watch her grow up, we watch her come into herself and her magic, but at the beginning of book 1, Vasya's favorite thing to do is to sit by the fire with her siblings and listen to tales and stories of the folklore and the magical creatures that surround them. Vasya and her family and her community live in the Russian wilderness, kind of on the outskirts of society, if you will, and this book is set in the 15th century. At the beginning of the story, tragedy strikes Vasya's home with the passing of her mother, and famine and food itself becomes much more scarce. Shortly after this, her father actually decides to remarry, and his new wife is very, very devout and basically promises to get rid of all the pagan folklore that is in the surrounding area. Vasya quickly realizes that this opens up a lot of danger for not only her family but the community at large, and she swears to save everyone by getting more involved in this folklore magic. This series is truly incredible. Catherine Arden has such an ability with combining elements of history and fantasy and merging the two where they work together so well. The author is very much inspired by the political reality and social realities of the time period in Russia for the inspiration of this book, and she embeds the cultural folklore of this time period but breathing life into it with actual magic. She's also drawing upon real stories and moments from time to add even more weight to her books. This story very much centers Vasya, different chapters of her life, and I loved reading every single book, watching her grow and change over the course of the story. This book centers love, both familial and romantic, and I just really appreciated all of the layers that existed within this book. We're in the Russian wilderness, we're in the central cities and in courtroom politics. There's so much that happens over the course of this, and I loved every single second of it. It is truly so beautifully written, and the contemplations on religion and history and culture was just simply too good. I love The Baron the Nightingale. I honestly feel like I should reread this soon because it stands as one of my all-time favorite series I've ever read. The next book I have to recommend is a literary fiction option, and that is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This to me was just one of the most remarkable slice of life stories I have picked up in a long time. I really appreciated not only the subject matter of this book, but also how the author sort of just dropped us in and pulled us out of these characters' lives. I also really appreciated how dynamic and imperfect a lot of the characters felt to me while reading them, but so unbelievably relatable. And also by the end, you're rooting for these characters so much. They just felt so alive to me while reading this book. If I Had Your Face basically follows a group of girls who all live in and around each other in the same apartment complex, very much contemplating the realities of being a young woman in Seoul, Korea in the modern era. It talks about things like plastic surgery, body image, sexism, and social hierarchies, but it also dives deeply into the intimate realities of these women and their relationships with each other, their jobs, their hopes, their dreams, and also how they interact and move with one another as well. Again, this is a book that really does not hold your hand in terms of just like dropping you into this story and this reality, but slowly and then all at once, you very quickly become so well acquainted with these women's souls, and you're just rooting for them. They're all young, they're all at sort of the beginning chapters of their adulthood in terms of their lives, and they're charting a path for themselves, and I just feel like this book has lived inside me like ever since I finished it. It was the perfect mix of bitter and sweet. It just felt so much like real life to me, and I just appreciated how intangible it was as well. But yeah, I loved the reading experience of this. It's not a long book at all. You will fly through it. For sure, one of my favorite literary fiction books I've read recently. Next up, I have a sci-fi recommendation, a duology that absolutely knocked my socks off and blew my mind, and that is a memory called Empire by Arkady Martine. The first book in this duology won the Hugo Award, but the second book truly was just as good as book one. This is a space opera series that not only combines elements of fantastic characters, a truly unguessable plot, but my favorite part was just unpicking and unraveling how this sci-fi world worked. The amount of care and attention that Arkady Martine went in building this sci-fi landscape was truly top-notch. I was fascinated by like every aspect of this reading experience. But to take a step back, this is a story that introduces us to our main character Mahit. And at the beginning of book one, Mahit is traveling from her very small space station, which she grew up on, and that's her community, that's her family, that's her home, to a faraway empire where she's going to act as an ambassador for her space station. Mahit, growing up, has always had a deep love and curiosity for this empire, a love for their literature, for their culture. She's just been fascinated by them. However, though, this empire is not a peaceful one. They are very colonially minded. Obviously, it's Mahit's job to basically prevent them from taking over her space station. Upon arrival, though, she's supposed to basically have a handoff with the previous ambassador, but she realizes that they are dead, and she doesn't know if it's murder or not, and so begins an absolute whirlwind of a book one. We're basically following Mahit over a course of just a couple of days as she's thrown headfirst in a huge political conspiracy that not only is dangling the fate of her own space station, but like the galaxy at large. There are so many moving pieces. Mahit is not given any information at all, and she's navigating so many complicated conversations and situations and simply trying to protect her own life. She makes unclear alliances along the way, and it's truly just fascinating. This is a book about language and diplomacy, about loving something even though it doesn't quite love you back. It has deep contemplations on self and belonging. It really explores dynamic relationships between people from different places. I loved that this book felt so intense without really having much combat at all. Everything was on the battlefield of like the spoken word, and I just felt like every word selected in this book had such significance and meaning, and I was on the edge of my seat. The intensity of this was fantastic, and I'm also happy to report that book two and the final novel of this duology is also so good. It really takes all of the elements of book one and just brings it to a whole new place. Again, really leading with language and diplomacy as really the main toolkit for our characters to survive and also try to save the day. So much worked in this. I just loved every single second of it. I can't wait for Arkady Martine to come out with a new book because I will definitely be picking it up, but this duology was amazing. Next up, I have a book I do feel like I talk about often, but I do feel like it's also been a minute, and that is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. This is one of my all-time favorite fantasy trilogies, and for sure one of, if not my favorite urban fantasy series I've ever read. But this book is set on the fictional island of Kakan and primarily takes place on this island's capital city. In this fantasy world, there is a substance called Jade, and people can basically wear it and become very, very powerful, or like more powerful than the average person. The production, oversight, and selling of Jade is entirely handled by crime families that exist within this island. In the Greenbone Saga, we are primarily reading from a variety of point of views of one of these crime families, following people from not only different areas of the family, but different power levels and also different positions that are all very unique from one another. And we're basically witnessing the rise of tensions between this family and another family that have been in a Cold War for basically decades. But all of that is about to change, and a power struggle is brewing within the city. This book is so good. It's so entertaining on so many different fronts. I mean, the crime element of this is just top notch. It has all of the elements of like classic mafia vibes, you know what I mean? We have the community aspect, we have the boots on the ground. We also follow people who are more politically involved and economically minded, and how all of those things are very much interconnected, and the balance of keeping all of the power for yourself is so tenuous. Not to mention, this is at the heart of it a family, and there is a lot of family drama, and the complicated dynamics between siblings, tertiary members of this family are on full display. People are born into this power, so that doesn't necessarily mean they earned it. So that is definitely at play as well. The twists and turns of this plot are truly breakneck, and the combat writing is amazing. This series is just so good, and you're following so many different characters. You can't help but fall in love with some people and hate others, which also makes the reading experience so interesting. This is all about blood, legacy, family, power, and the pursuit of maintaining all of those things. People talk about this series a lot for a reason. I also feel like it's a great place to start if you don't often read a lot of fantasy, as a lot of the mechanics of this fantasy world are very similar to ours, given that it is urban fantasy, but this is just so entertaining. Next up is another literary fiction story with just a dash of magic and fantasy, and that book is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is truly one of the most heartbreaking, beautiful books I have ever read. I also listened to the audiobook of this, which I would highly recommend as well. The narrator and just how it captures the sentiment of the story, they just did such a fantastic job. Maggie O'Farrell has this innate ability of basically taking these well-known historical figures or these historical moments and really humanizing them in a way that just completely creates a whole new experience. Hamnet is following William Shakespeare's home life, primarily his relationship with his wife before he became very famous. Also the tragic reality of what happened when the Black Plague came to his family's home and the impact and aftermath of that occurrence. This book will absolutely draw you in from the writing style. And yes, this book is following William Shakespeare's family, but the fame and notoriety of that character is not significant to this book at all, because so much of the story is about how beautiful this family unit is, how complex this family unit is, but also how relatable the emotions and the experiences of what's happening within this household, regardless if this is happening in the 15th century or the 21st century. Also, this book is primarily told from William Shakespeare's wife's point of view, Agnes, and we follow Agnes when she's a young woman who has kind of peculiar abilities. She's also a bit of a spinster. No one's really interested in her. You watch her as she falls in love with this young Latin tutor on her father's property. You watch them move into a household of their own, have children, you follow these children. It just has this beautiful domestic quality to it. And then you also go through the feelings of grief and heartbreak as these idyllic elements of their domestic household break apart. And don't get me wrong, it's not that Maggie O'Farrell is trying to paint William Shakespeare and his family as this perfect familial unit, but it's more to say that they are like any other family out there, and they have moments of beautiful love and beautiful heartbreak, disagreements, frustrations, and it's all sort of expressed on the page of the story. It's just truly so moving and so timeless of a book. I recommend this story to everyone. I feel like it will just captivate you, and again, the audiobook is amazing. Next up, I have to mention one of my all-time fantasy faves, and that is Robert Jackson Bennett, and we're going to be talking about Foundry Side by this author. Honestly, any of his series that he has released, I would highly recommend. I feel like he's getting a lot of notoriety for The Tainted Cup, which just came out, which I also read and liked, but I thought I would give a little love to Foundry Side, as this is a completed series of his that I really enjoyed. This series is like a classic underdog taking on an immense power, thieves and the knight that are trying to pull off the perfect heist, and so much found family your heart will absolutely sing. But this book is set in a world I would kind of describe as a fantasy version of Renaissance Venice. Merchant houses have all of the power here. In fact, 80% of the land where our main character Sansia lives are controlled by these merchant houses, and these merchant houses aren't just like compounds or homes, they're literally like walled cities within the city. They have their own jobs, they have their own armies, everything is very self-contained, and the remaining bit of land, which is about 20%, is completely lawless, and it's called Foundry Side, which again is where our main character Sansia lives. And Sansia makes a living by being a thief, and she's a very fantastic one at that, and that's where we find her at the beginning of book 1, stealing a very powerful and ancient artifact, which she successfully does because she is talented. This book also has one of my favorite magic systems I've ever come across. I often describe it as like magical coding. Basically, if you understand the language of a physical item, you can break into it and rewrite it to have it act in a different way, perhaps making a stone wall less strong, making water run in a different direction. You can just basically convince the laws of nature to just behave a little differently, and it's so cool, and how the magic system grows on itself book over book is top notch. But again, Sansia steals this object because she's good at her job. She basically finds herself in the midst of a power struggle between different merchant houses, and so begins again a group of unlikely individuals trying to pull off an impossible heist. And it's both so funny and so intense. The characters in this series you will truly love with all of your heart. There's great romance, there's great friendship bonds, there's just so much at play that works well. I could never guess the direction that the plot was going in. I loved how Robert Jackson Bennett was constantly tricking me. I really appreciated it. And again, the plot growth book over book over book was also really well done as well. And it's a completed trilogy. So if you like book one, you can marathon the rest. And the last book I'm going to recommend is another lush and beautifully written series. I also believe it's technically YA, so I feel like it's really approachable for lots of different readers, even if you don't read a lot of fantasy. And that is the Elements of Cadence series, the first one being A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This series is just so mesmerizing, another multi-POV book set on a very strange and peculiar place. But in this story, we're first introduced to our main character, Jack, and Jack is a bard, and he moved away from the small island home he grew up on 10 years prior to begin his training to be a bard. However, though, at the beginning of this book, he receives a urgent missive for him to return back home to help in an investigation because girls are going missing on this island. The island in which Jack is from is magical. It's also cursed. Basically, many generations prior to the start of this novel, a disagreement happened between two sides of this island, people who have despised each other for generations, resulting in one side of the island to have very lush and vibrant landscapes, but the magic there to be very hostile to anyone who wields it. And then on the other side of the island, natural resources are very limited, but the magic is incredibly powerful. Also living here are elemental magic forces, and things are just very much out of balance, very dangerous and complicated. Jack returns home to help in this investigation, and he has to work alongside his childhood arch nemesis, but they quickly put their hatred aside and they just kind of have a friendly banter, if you will. And so begins an urgent search for these lost girls, but also so begins the opening of a much larger wound that has existed on this island again for many, many years. This story is just beautiful. Again, you're following and reading from a lot of different characters present and living on this island, which I love so much. The writing style is lyrical and magical and will absolutely pull you in. It's all about folklore and history and the complicated nature of relationships and hatred over time, and how pain can persist through time and through many different people. But ultimately, it's about a magical conundrum and unlikely people working together to try to solve it. I truly love book one, and I'm happy to report book two was even better. It also has one of my favorite romantic tropes of all time. Silly, string bean, confused, lost boy with a strong-willed female that's constantly trying to keep him from just wandering off aimlessly. It's truly a fantastic combination if you ask me. But this series absolutely shattered me, broke me into a million pieces, and then put all of the pieces back together again. I loved it. Alrighty guys, those are 7 of my all-time favorite books. Please let me know some of your all-time favorite books, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!